Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Heather Brandt, Associate Dean for Professional Development in the Graduate School. We're going to get started promptly at 2 p.m. Until then, you'll see this first slide that indicates we will begin shortly. If you have any questions during this time, please use either the Questions tab on the drop-down menu or the chat function. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll get started soon. Thanks for joining our webinar today, Considering and Applying Your Transferable Skills. I'm Heather Brandt, Associate Dean in the Graduate School at the University of South Carolina. And today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our presenter, Dr. Kathy Zuckweiler, who is with Midwestern State University in just a moment. And I've already introduced myself to you, and I'll serve as the moderator today for this Transferable Skills webinar. So I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Zuckweiler, who is the Dean of the Graduate School at Midwestern State University and also serves as the Director in the Office of Sponsored Programs and Research. And if you'd like to learn more about Dr. Zuckweiler, please take a look at her faculty profile. How I met Dr. Zuckweiler is a fun story. This summer, we both attended the Council of Graduate Schools summer workshops that were held in Denver, Colorado. And during the course of our conversation, we happened to end up sitting at the same table and saw each other several more times. Some of you may know that I have a Diet Dr. Pepper addiction, and so she accompanied me to get a drink as well from the 7-Eleven around the corner, and I started telling her more about our professional development offerings in the graduate school. And she mentioned some of her work in the area of transferable skills. So after I got back from the Council of Graduate Schools meeting, I reached out to her to engage in potentially having her share some of her expertise in this field of transferable skills with our graduate students. So I'm very pleased today to have her joining us to give the webinar on this topic. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Zuckweiler. During the course of this webinar, as we're doing that, I want to let you know that you can post questions and chat in the drop-down menu box. You'll see that where it says your dashboard. It includes the questions and chat functions. In addition, the webinar is being recorded, so you can come back to it for later viewing at the end of the webinar. You'll receive a link. And lastly, a PDF of all of the slides will be sent to those of you who registered at the original start time of the webinar. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to switch things over to Dr. Zuckweiler to be the presenter today. Dr. Zuckweiler, take it away.
Thanks, Dr. Brandt. I've often found that my Dr. Pepper friends are some of the most lasting friendships I have. So thank you very much for inviting me to join you today.
I just want to let you know that I think your screen might have switched again. If you want to click on the display settings to flip it.
Well, there we go.
You're all set. All right, take it away. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So thanks again for inviting me to join you today. I've been working on transferable skills for probably a couple of years now. And it first came to my consciousness because I was reading some information actually related to the Council of Graduate Schools about how PhDs who do not wish to go into academia are looking at transferring their skills to positions in industry. And what was interesting was that while PhDs obviously have a very detailed and extensive education, mapping what they know to an industry environment in a way that employers can look at that candidate and see how they could be a real asset to the organization can be a bit of a challenge. Kind of coincided with the renewed attention in the media and state legislatures and other stakeholders of higher education who are very widely now calling for colleges and universities to produce graduates with skills that clearly and readily apply to employment settings. So there's a lot of chatter, if you will, about transferable skills, but it's a little bit of a hard thing to pin down. So I'll share with you what I know today and hope that there is some value in it for you. I do welcome questions as we go, and certainly there'll be time for Q&A at the end. So this is a little bit of an outline of where we'll go today. We'll talk about what transferable skills are, why they're important, and then I think this next piece is really the key. The difference between having the skills and having the ability to transfer them from one context to another. And then we'll also talk about strategies for leveraging your transferable skills as you go forward in whatever your career choices may be. So what are transferable skills? There's all kinds of lists that you can find in industry and publications. There's not a lot of consensus as to what they entail. A fairly broad definition is a group of skills that adhere to an individual and which individuals carry with them wherever they go. So they're intrinsic to you. We can somewhat subdivide them into technical skills, which would include things like experience that you may have obtained in a variety of work or professional settings, certainly your education and any certifications that you may have. If you have artistic skills or musical skills, computer skills. And computer skills can be hardware, software, networking. There's a whole range of computer skills that you might have. Knowledge of methods or procedures, and that can be, again, a multifaceted concept. So that may be statistical methods, that may be regulatory procedures, clinical procedures. Again, this is very, largely industry specific because it's obviously going to vary the methods or procedures that are used in different fields. Languages are hard skills. You have a certain level of competency in whatever languages you may speak. Then we can also talk about mechanical and technical knowledge that is very relevant in a lot of different fields. Complementing the hard skills are the interpersonal or the soft skills. And there's, again, a laundry list of these that can include things like communication skills, both written and verbal, leadership skills, decision-making, teamwork, initiative, the ability to learn, analytical or logical abilities, and then one of my favorites, the ability to negotiate or to consult. It used to be said that employers would hire for hard skills and try to develop the soft skills, and what we're seeing anymore is a shift to where employers are looking for people that have the soft skills, that they have good communication abilities, that they have some leadership experience, that they are comfortable working in teams, and perhaps most importantly, that they have the ability and the willingness to learn. And candidates that have those traits, then employers figure that they can teach the technical skills. They can develop those perhaps more easily than they can develop the soft skills. Another element of this that I don't have on the slide but I think is also very important, there's a sort of a tangentially related aspect that they call transferable traits. And these are really not things that you learn, they're more personality traits. Things like honesty, integrity, the ability to adapt to different situations, dedication, tenacity, loyalty, having a positive attitude, self-confidence, self-motivation. So if you start a project, you'll see it through. These are all things that have been cited in a variety of articles and a variety of sources over a long period of time. When I first started looking at this topic, I did what anybody would do. I ran a Google Scholar search. And I come to find out that transferable skills have gone by a variety of names, marketable skills, core skills, but that the literature on transferable skills goes back over 50 years, and that there's some 30,000 plus published articles. This is not a new topic by any stretch. The interesting thing about this is that given the depth and breadth of information available, exactly what they are and how to transfer them is still not really well known. We haven't reached a point where we have a general consensus. What's driving this, I think, right now, I mentioned that there have been calls for greater accountability from a variety of stakeholders. Our university is based out of Wichita Falls, Texas. And the state of Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board has a new initiative, relatively new, called the 60 by 30 text, this first link here. And 60 by 30 text is a requirement that all graduates of Texas institutions of higher education will graduate with identifiable, marketable skills. And they are following up on that and requiring all institutions, including graduate schools within the institution, to provide a list of marketable skills or transferable skills that their graduates will have attained and mapping them to specific programs and then figuring out how we're going to assess them. LEAP, which is Liberal Education in America's Promise, from the AAC&U, they have a list of essential learning outcomes, and I can click through to these links. I think they'll work. Let's find out. Heather, are you able to see that, or did it come up on the other screen?
No, it came up on the other screen, but if you want to just drag it over onto this main screen, we should be able to see it. Yep, there it is.
Got it?
All right.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you. So the essential learning outcomes, especially under the intellectual and practical skills, start to look a lot like a list of transferable skills: written and oral communication, inquiry and analysis, quantitative literacy, information literacy, teamwork and problem solving. These are widely cited in literature as well. Other accrediting agencies, including the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business, they have a reference in their 2013 accreditation standards that says that business schools must respond to the business world's changing needs by providing relevant knowledge and skills to the communities they serve. And there again, if you're familiar with AACSB, that's my home discipline, they require that you assure assurance of learning, that you assess all of that and make sure that it works. If we have anybody on in education, CAPE also requires that there's a very practical applied skill set taught to their teachers, their teacher candidates, that they can then apply when they go into the classroom. ABET accredits engineering programs. They also have a very clear statement about expectations related to the applicability and transferability of the skills that their graduates get. This is just a subset. A lot of states have transferable skills or marketable skills initiatives. A variety of stakeholders do, and increasingly state legislatures are evaluating institutions of higher education on their ability to produce graduates with transferable skills, and then for those graduates to be able to successfully seek employment in industry or whatever industry they choose to go into. So this makes it kind of an interesting topic because I think that the accountability piece has always been there to some extent, but it's becoming much more at a forefront now, and some states are even starting to tie state appropriations for institutions of higher education to their ability to attain certain outcomes, and marketable skills is one of those outcomes that keeps showing up. So if we talk about then, why are they important? Why do we need to know this? I think that from a purely practical job perspective, they do enable an employer to distinguish between candidates with similar qualifications and backgrounds. Now, one of the things I want to point out here is that transferable skills, there's a knack and a technique to articulating the transferable skills that you have. And we'll talk about strategies to do that. So just having the transferable skills is not necessarily enough. In order to enable that employer to distinguish between you and another candidate, you have to draw them a roadmap and help them understand how your transferable skills are relevant to them. And like I said, we'll talk about that here in a minute. Other things that transferable skills do is they help improve your competitiveness and the impact of a resume or cover letter. If you can provide specific, clear, concise, relevant examples in your resume or in your cover letter, it can help you be more competitive and help you make a very positive first impression. The other thing they do is provide talking points for interviews, especially, as well as networking and career management discussions. So when you go to an interview and you've got something in your resume or in your cover letter that a prospective employer asks you about, if you've got a really good talking point, if you will, an elevator speech, a 30-second, really key example, can be a tremendous asset to you and help you, again, stand out, be distinguishable, and help you prove up your value to that employer. Another option is that it will help facilitate career advancement. The ability to transfer skills from one context to another is key, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Having the ability to do that can open up career doors that you may not have considered before. I'll tell you about a friend of mine a little bit later. She had an attitude of, what the heck? When an opportunity came open, her attitude was, well, what the heck? And she tried it out and has ascended very, very high in her profession because she tried it. Some other things that transferable skills can do for you, especially when you're talking to prospective employers, is if you are able to target your transferable skills to a particular industry or particular job, it signals a clear understanding of the target role requirements for that industry and that position and that company. If you're able to articulate your transferable skills, it also indicates that you've really thought this through, and that will help you transition more smoothly into a new role or into a new field, for example, from academia to industry. It also helps to reduce the risk of redundancy over the long term. If you kind of know what you're talking about, know what you're doing, it can make it a little bit more of a smooth, linear transition and process than if you have to keep backtracking. So while they're a little bit hard to pin down and can be a little bit hard to contextualize, transferable skills are really important, and they I think are one of the key tools in your toolbox as you start to prepare for your career. Even if you're staying in academia, you need to talk about how what you do translates to your new prospective employer, university. If you're trying to make the jump from academia to industry, then this is really key, because you may be really, really good at research, and you can write one heck of a literature review and a research question and design a phenomenal study. But if you're looking at going to work for, say, a business organization that doesn't really engage in academics type research, they don't know why they care. You may be really good at it, and you need to show them why it matters to them, how it matters, how it makes a difference in their business and their success. And if you can do that by showing how those skills transfer, you've really got their attention. All right, so I mentioned that the context piece is important. And so as we look at developing our transferable skills, it's not just the skills themselves, the hard skills, the soft skills, but the transfer skills, the ability to recognize the different contexts and to figure out how to transfer what we know here, say in academia, to what we need to do and need to know there in industry or in a new employer or wherever that may be. We live in context, we learn in context, we work in context, and yet no two contexts are exactly the same. So our ability to contextualize skills is as important as the skills themselves. And I think this is where a lot of the research, or a lot of the mass media treatment of transferable skills falls down. We just talk about the skills. We need to be good communicators. We need to have good decision-making abilities. We need to be leaders. We need to have excellent technology skills, whatever it might be. Having those skills alone doesn't, it's necessary but not sufficient for success. The sufficiency part comes in with the ability to contextualize. To provide another perspective on that, I mentioned the literature on this goes back a long ways, and this is not all that far, but Dr. Bridges writes, the identification of widely applicable, transferable, or core skills may be quite useful, though it threatens to be an enormous list of items. What is more intriguing, and in many ways more central to a properly educative endeavor, is the identification of what is involved in the transferring skills, or what it is that enables someone with some knowledge, learning, understanding, or skill gained in one cognitive domain and/or social context to adapt, modify, or extend it in such a way as to be able to apply it in another. So if you start to think about that, how do you figure out how to contextualize? I'd like to offer some techniques for you to consider. The first one that I try to always encourage people to do is to deconstruct that skill set. So if you are a really, really good researcher, and that's a tremendous strength for you, that unto itself encompasses a fairly vast array of skills. So in order to write a good research paper, you need to first develop a good research question. Well, that requires synthesizing various elements that are already in the literature, identifying gaps. So we're synthesizing existing literature, identifying gaps in that literature, and pulling it together into a fairly concise, measurable, testable statement or question. There's a whole bunch of skills right there, and we're not even past the research question. When you're doing a literature review, you're pulling together sources of information that may be fairly wildly disparate and looking for patterns in that information, looking for similarities, points of agreement, points of disagreement. And this is a very simplistic deconstruction, but hopefully this helps you start to think about what all you might be able to do or might be able to pull out of what you do, that you can then start to repackage or recast or reformulate in a way that makes sense to your prospective employer. That context is important because in academia, writing a really good research paper is a key skill, and there's a level of understanding in an academic context what that entails, even across disciplines. But in industry, there's not many of them write research papers, certainly not dissertations. So how can you take your thesis or your dissertation skills and put those in a way that your prospective employer understands them? One of the ways to do that is to build a narrative. There's quite a body of literature on using narratives as a way to help people transfer skills or transfer knowledge from one domain to another. And by constructing a narrative or constructing a story around what you do and why it's important and how it worked out and what the outcome was, it helps the brain at some cognitive level seek patterns. That's what our brains want to do, is they want to find patterns in data. And so if we can, I hate to use the dreaded story problem example, but really if you can write a story problem, you can start to look at how to process that information and then also be able to share it with others. Give you an example. A friend shared with me last week an example of a classroom exercise that was done where students were divided up into two groups, a treatment group and a control group. And the control group was given a series of facts about how to attack a very large tumor that was largely inoperable. If they used the laser, and I'm not a medical person, and that's probably fast becoming very evident, so I apologize in advance for the oversimplification of the example. But the patient had a very large tumor that if they used the laser to go in and try to excise the tumor and remove it, would cut such a large hole in the patient, that they likely wouldn't survive. The treatment group was given a story, a narrative, about an army that was trying to invade a city. And they could march up the main road and likely be just decimated and not succeed. Or they could use a variety of side roads that came at the city from all different directions and use it to from a multi-attack approach, overwhelm the city with a bunch of small attacks rather than one large frontal assault. When the treatment group that had the narrative about the military attacking the city was given the tumor situation, they looked at it and very quickly realized that, well, the way to do this is to not go in with one big laser straight on, but to come at the tumor from multiple smaller attacks from the side. So it would not have the devastating effects on the patient, but would have the devastating effect on the tumor. And they were very quickly and very easily able to transfer their understanding of how this military had attacked the city to how they could use modern medicine to treat this tumor. So that narrative helps the brain build patterns and help the brain make connections in a way that makes it a lot easier to transfer or to contextualize a set of skills in one domain into another domain. And that really kind of gets at my next point, which is to look for the similarities, try to find the patterns. You may know nothing about a particular domain or a particular industry or a particular setting, but you'd be surprised. You actually probably know some things about it. And so if you start to look at, so how does this new setting match up with something I may have seen or done in the past? What even slightly tenuous connections can I draw? Then that helps your brain start to build those roads and helps it start to make those connections to figure out how I can take what I know and what I learned over here and apply it over there. So how can you leverage your skills? If you're trying to figure out how to successfully present your transferable skills to prospective employers, there are some things you can do in preparation that will serve you very well in the long run. First is to inventory your skills. What skills do you have in the technical and interpersonal realms? And to extend that to the personality or the transferable traits, what intrinsic traits do you have personally that may be useful to you and to your employer? Once you've inventoried your skills, think about what skills are required for the job, and then match your skills to the job requirements. Now, this seems pretty straightforward, but as we talk about it, I think you'll find out it's maybe not. Once you've achieved those things, start to articulate how your skills enable you to do the job. Really what employers are interested in is that doing piece, the outcomes focus. How can you help me? So when we start to talk about inventorying your skills, obviously you can start with self-analysis. And this is where you start to deconstruct what you know, think about what you're good at, what you enjoy, then start to break it apart into manageable pieces or to smaller pieces and keep breaking it down until you get to a fundamental skill level that you can then build up with other pieces in another way to apply in another industry. So that self-analysis, that self-reflection is really critically important, and frankly it takes some time. You can also ask others for their input and make sure that they're honest. Telling you that what they think you want to hear may not be the best service to you at that time. Then finally, think about how you use your skills. If you think about what skills you have through your self-analysis and what others see you as having, then the next step is how do you use them? Is there a way that you can take what you know and use it in a different context? And I'll give you an example here in just a minute. Once you inventory your skills, the next step is to research the required skills for a particular job. This would seem to be fairly easy. You could read the job posting and look at what they are asking for. The challenge is this is not maybe as easy as it seems, and that's due to the limited ability of managers to articulate what skills are needed and why. There are several prior studies that comment on the ambiguity and meaninglessness of many of the comments that managers make about the skills that they deem critically important for managerial work. So sometimes the comments that the managers give are so abstract as to be useless, and then the interviewees had limited ability to list the skill required for the job. So managers found it hard to identify words relevant to specific areas of competency. So they use catch-all terms like good communicator, proven leader, good decision-making skills, strong analytical abilities, that really don't offer a lot of insight into exactly what is needed for that position. There was a 1990 study of personal skills considered important in 40 UK companies, and there was a lot of confusion among the interviewees as to what the managers of the hiring companies meant by these terms. And what they found is that the same words meant very different things to different people, both between organizations and, here's the kicker, within them. So for example, good decision making was characterized in one firm as taking decisions only when you have all the facts. But in another company, good decision making was characterized as proactively assessing prevailing business conditions and calculating risks and contingent probabilities. Completely different approach, completely different risk tolerance, completely different skill set needed to be successful in those environments. So given that ambiguity that's present in a lot of job postings, how do you get that information? A lot of times if you talk to people, and especially if you can talk to them in a more informal setting like a networking setting or a young professionals setting, you can get some insight if you're actively listening and paying attention to not so much what do you mean by good communicator, but if they tell you about how work gets done, how they interact with prospective clients, with suppliers, with customers, with others within the firm. You can pick up on some of that. The other thing is that if you have to take a shot in the dark, if they say that they want a good communicator, give them an example of how you have communicated successfully. So let's walk through one of those. When you're trying to match your skills to the requirements that are listed, as vague as they may be, you want to try to develop relevant, specific, concise examples. So let's say the job asks that you have communication skills. You think, okay, well, in my career as a graduate student, I've given conference presentations. So that's an example of communication skills. Okay, it's relevant, not specific enough. So let's keep going. If we keep deconstructing that, then to give a conference presentation, you have to take what is a fairly large study, presumably, and simplify it and break it down into the key information, because you really only have, what, maybe 20 minutes to do your presentation. So you've got to simplify the information from the study. You also have to know your audience. The way you make the presentation is going to vary depending on whether you're talking to a group of scholars in the same discipline that have quite a bit of background knowledge about your topic, or if you're talking to a more general audience that may be from several different disciplines but still academics, or if you're talking to a lay audience that doesn't have maybe the highly technical or detailed knowledge about your topic. The other thing that you have to do when you make a conference presentation is use your technology effectively. So if you're using PowerPoint slides or videos, or if you're using clickers to get audience input as you're going, whatever technology you're using to make that presentation. So we can take this communication skill that we exemplify through our conference presentation and transform that by breaking it down into this statement that we could put on, say, a resume or a cover letter, and say that I'm an engaging and versatile communicator with a proven ability to effectively leverage technology to present complex ideas to diverse audiences. Okay, so then I can take that statement and I can provide a specific example to a prospective employer. I can say that, you know, at the professional meeting in my discipline last year or last month, whenever it might be, I talked about my dissertation research or my thesis research. And my project is fairly nuanced or fairly detailed, and we're looking at this particular phenomenon. But my audience really was from a broader academic discipline. So I was able to distill the information in a way that was understandable to the entire audience, still make it interesting, and I did all that through a PowerPoint presentation that had embedded video and whatever else you might have done. So you can provide a very specific example, a very concise example of how you effectively gave an oral presentation to a general audience. You can also talk about if you've been a leader on a lab project or a consulting project. You can talk about how, as a leader, you were involved in working with your teammates and seeing a project through to completion. So if you take that leadership aspect, and we saw the project through, in order to manage that project, we had to specify the scope of the project, build relationships within the team and with other stakeholders involved in completing the project, and then we had to implement the specific steps and concepts that we talked about. So then you could take that project management example and morph that into a statement that you could be a results-oriented leader, the proven ability to collaboratively manage projects, remember you had a team working on this, all the way through to implementation. So that helps your prospective employer understand how what you do in academia applies to their particular context. What that all boils down to for prospective employers is how you can do the job. This is an emphasis on outcomes. So you want to develop a series of statements like your communication example. Have a few of them that you might be able to pull out of the bag really on short notice. Make sure that they're outcomes-based. Make sure that you're looking at what you can do for the employer. Because remember that really what they want to know is, what can you do for me? Prepare your examples. If they're recent, that's helpful. Relevant is absolutely important, and concise. examples lose a lot of their impact if it takes 10 minutes to get through them. So try to aim for kind of an elevator speech, a 30-second, maybe a minute example where you can sort of walk your listener through the key pieces and give them the information they need, and then wrap it up with a statement of how that benefits them or their business. Then strategically locate these in your cover letter, your resume, other materials that you may be submitting as part of your application packet. The other piece of that is make sure that if you put them in your cover letter, your resume, or wherever else, that you're ready to talk about them if you get an interview. And that could be a phone interview or a face-to-face interview. You want to be really careful to not overstate them and be immediately ready to, oh yeah, thanks for asking about that. Let me tell you what I did. Because I guarantee you, if it's there and it caught their attention, they'll ask about it, and that's what you want. So some final thoughts to start to try to wrap this up. First of all, this takes time. This is something you'll need to spend some time preparing for before you ever start getting to the cover letter and resume sending out stage. The self-analysis takes time. It's important. I think it's time very well spent. But it takes time to think about things from your perspective, to ask others for their input. And then you really want to think about this in terms of your long-term professional identity. How do you want to be known? If you think about it, in your professional circles right now, there are people that fill different roles. Somebody's likely the visionary. If I ask you, who do you turn to when you need to get something done, my bet is you had a name pop into your head right away. You can talk to, if I ask you, who do you turn to when you need an outside-the-box perspective on this? If you keep running into the same wall and you need to figure out how to change the conversation, probably have somebody there. So who do you want to be? I would love to be a humorist, but that's not my skill set. So my long-term professional identity has nothing to do with humor or comedy. I tend to have built a reputation over the years for when something needs to get done. I'm a lot of times the person that gets called. I'm not particularly visionary, but I'm darn good at implementation and execution. And so a lot of my skill set is supporting that identity. I can be diplomatic, but I can also be very blunt, and here's what we need to do, and here's how we're going to get it done, and delegate and follow up. And that fits with my personal traits, that fits with the skill set that I have. It might not surprise you to know that my background is operations management, which is in the business college, and that's focused on serving customers, producing product, getting things ready to sell, and getting them out the door. So for me, that's my identity. That fits. Be realistic. If you've got an innate sense of humor, that has a lot of value in a lot of settings. If that's not you, don't try to force it. Do something that you can be day in, day out, when things are going well and when things are not going so well, because that long-term professional identity needs to really fit with who you are, with who your skill set, or what your skill set entails. It becomes a lot easier to transfer from one entity to another, from one context to another, if that is just consistent with who you are. The other thing is, transferable skills are not static. You can continue to develop your core transferable skills for your entire life, for your entire career. And the more you do that, the more opportunities I think you'll find. Corollary to that is to continue to develop your transfer skills. Keep looking at ways to find patterns in the data, to examine similarities, to figure out, okay, so what I know here, I think I might be able to use that over there, and I might be able to open some new doors by doing so. And that leads to my last point, which is to choose to be uncomfortable, which might sound kind of funny. I mentioned my friend who had a what the heck attitude. She's an academic, started out as a faculty member, and currently is the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at a school a couple hours from here in Texas. She got to that position by choosing to be uncomfortable. She had an opportunity at one time to run the bookstore at her institution. She'd never run a bookstore, but she said, what the heck, and tried it. And she learned a lot about that. She was involved in managing part of the library at one time. The same thing, what the heck, I don't know anything about it, but I'll figure it out. She had faith in her abilities, she had faith in her skill set, she had good people around her to help her. So she chose to be uncomfortable at several points in her career, and it's enabled her to rise to be the chief academic officer at her school. Had she played it safe and stayed within a fairly comfortable zone, it wouldn't have challenged her to develop her transfer skills, to figure out how what she knew as a faculty member might be relevant in the bookstore, and how what she'd learned as a faculty member and as a bookstore manager might help out in the library, and how now as EVP AA she has a really, really deep and thorough understanding of how the entire operation works at her institution. So it's made her very successful because she kept working on those skills, kept learning, kept transferring, kept growing, and she developed that long-term professional identity of, yeah, I'll give it a shot, we'll figure it out, I'll get it done. And she was uncomfortable a whole lot on that road, but it served her well. And so I would encourage you, no matter where you are in your program, in your professional career, start thinking about what you know, because I think you'll find out you know an awful lot, and you're good at some really important things. So then think about how you might be able to leverage those into the job of your dreams. Be uncomfortable, dream big, and do your homework, do your preparation work to get those statements ready, to figure out how you can tell your prospective employers, hey, this is what I can do for you. I think if you do that, I think you'll be very successful. I very much appreciate your time and attention, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Heather, I'll turn this back over to you now so you can manage the screens, if that's okay.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Dr. Zeff Wyler, for that very that excellent overview of transferable skills and thinking about what they mean on paper and what they mean on practice, and the importance of gaining them throughout your career, and realizing they aren't static, and what they look like in an academic setting versus a non-academic setting. I think that was really useful information for our graduate students. So for those of you who are on the line, if you have a question for Dr. Zeff Wyler, please use either the question function or chat function in the webinar. And I'll give everyone just a second to be able to type in any questions that you may have. And in the interim, Dr. Zeff Wyler, I have a question for you. When you were talking about sort of an assessment or reflection of the transferable skills that you may have, what types of assessments might you recommend for that process, and how are those or aren't those the best options for graduate students?
Are you asking about kind of the personal assessment piece?
Yes, the personal assessment, yes.
So I think you can, of course, make this as elaborate as you want to, but one simple way to do it might be to just create a table where you have a heading or a column or a row, depending on how you orient it, for soft skills. Now, what interpersonal skills do I have, do I excel at, or what am I comfortable doing? What analytical skills do I currently possess? And be realistic about, these are things I'm really proficient at, and these are things that I have some competency at, but I could maybe improve that competency a little bit. What hard skills or technical skills do I currently possess? A couple other things that come up fairly often. Organizational skills is something that we see a lot from employers in terms of planning skills, administrative skills, managerial skills, and then looking at that traits, those transferable traits. Integrity, honesty, tenacity, ability to see things through, adaptability, that type of thing. So you can even just start out with a table. I mean, it doesn't have to be real elaborate. And once you kind of get an initial list of the different types of skills you think you have, then you can kind of start deconstructing them and looking for complementarities between them, which skills across categories complement each other, what skills you might want to try to develop a little bit more.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts that you may have, recommendations that you may want to make, including any recommended websites for online personal assessments that you can think of?
I think you've got a good list there, Dr. Brandt. One thing I might suggest is that as you're starting to develop the statements that you might use in cover letters and resumes, it's good to vet those before you actually put them out there to employers. So I would encourage people to use their career management center or even faculty to maybe their dissertation or thesis chair, kind of get an initial gut reaction to your statements, because sometimes, I'm sure we've all seen them where they're a little bit too much, I guess, if you kind of know what I mean, that you read it and it's like, wow, this person really must be impressive. It's a little bit over the top. So I think you want to develop your statements and prepare your examples to support them. And I'd test drive them before I took them out to prospective employers. Career Management Center is a good option for that. Family is a good option for that. Faculty that might be willing to help, dissertation chair or committee, thesis chair committee. But I think that the list of web resources that you have, I think is fairly complete.
Thank you. And that question came from Alicia Boutte, who is one of our doctoral students in public health. And I hope that answered your question, Alicia. And I will mention to those of you who are still on the webinar, today in our Grad Prof Dev blog, that the extra written by Jennifer Mandelbaum, you may want to take a look at that, because there may be some additional information about personal assessments and perhaps a chance for you to gain access to a free assessment. So without getting into too many more details there, suffice it to say, take a look at Jennifer's Grad Prof DEV extra blog today online. Are there any final questions that you would like to ask of Dr. Wyler? All right, hearing none, I know you all join me in thanking Dr. Zuckweiler for her time in preparing this excellent webinar as part of our professional development offerings in the graduate school, and I certainly thank you as well. I'm so glad that our paths crossed and that we bonded over Dr. Pepper and also our passion for providing graduate students with opportunities to address professional development, growth, and personal growth as well. As a reminder to those of you who are listening in and watching the webinar today, we have a full calendar of events for the fall semester. We have several in-person offerings and also webinars coming up this month, next month, and into early December. So take a look at the graduate school events calendar for more information. In addition, we are continuing Professional Development Fridays. Today's topic is searching for a job. We have some excellent resources for you to understand the preparation required before you get to the actual search. And one of the elements of preparation is most definitely assessing your transferable skills and understanding how those translate and transform in different career settings. Thanks again to everyone for joining. Thank you, Dr. Zuckweiler, and I look forward to hopefully having you join us in one of our upcoming professional development offerings. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brandt.
Thank you.